want to show you some examples, some actual adoption implementations that show how team topologies helped with some of the aspects of business agility. And finally, just to a brief section about what else matters, right? Because when we're talking about business agility, it's not just team topologies that's going to solve everything. And I believe it's a strong help to achieve business agility, but obviously there's more to it. So getting started straight away with the content, what is business agility, right? And I'm sure every speaker on this meetup that has talked about business agility probably had a different definition, or at least not exactly the same. It's kind of a broad concept. You can look at it from different angles. So I'm going to present you what is our angle. Like, very specifically, when I'm talking about business agility today, I'm talking about the ability to respond rapidly, meaning in hours, ideally, to changing internal and external conditions, right? So it's kind of a more specific, perhaps, definition than others that you've seen, but it kind of sets the stage to, okay, really, if we really want to say that we're agile in terms of business and adaptability to customer needs and to changes around us, okay, then we need to show and to be able to respond rapidly in hours. Like, that's the time frame that we're looking at today for fast-paced organizations that respond quickly to change. We're talking about hours or days. We're not talking about weeks or months, definitely not. So kind of sets the stage. Maybe it's an ambition, maybe it's a target that we're trying to reach, right? But it would be, let's say, fitting to business agility that we can take a request from a customer, or we can look at some issue with our offerings and we can act upon it quickly without a lot of obstacles, without a lot of handoffs of work and all those kind of things that tend to slow us down. And why do we need business agility? Well, I think it's pretty clear for most people, but we're working in a different setup than we've been for probably for most of our careers. Obviously, some people have been working remotely for a long time, but it's something for most of the workforce, even in ITs, is something new. The speed at which change comes at us is keeps getting faster, right? How technology changes, and other aspects, like I said, that we're not always thinking, but climate, geopolitical, health aspects as well, that have an impact in the organization as well, even if we're not working directly in those markets or in those kind of industry, but it still affects us to some extent. And obviously there's more and more competition around the world. Like, most organizations, with some exceptions, of course, are not competing in their local market anymore. They're not competing just in one country. They have competition from everywhere in the world, and the barrier to entry in many industries has been lowered. Even if you think about, obviously, finance with fintech, but even if you look at healthcare, there's also barriers that have been lowered, both from regulation perspective and technology perspective. I was just, interestingly, as an anecdote, just yesterday I was talking to a client in Brazil, where a change in regulation that's coming in a couple of months basically means they lose all their competitive advantage, which was based on the network they have of their customers, because they provide, how would you say this in English? They provide this sort of fidelity cards, when you're a customer of some chain and you get points, and then you can use those points. But instead of being for chains, it's for your own employer, right? When you have a card from your employer where you get maybe benefits for your meals. So you have a certain amount that you can spend on meals, but then there are other advantages. Anyway, their competitive advantage was that they have a network, and because of regulations, suddenly they are forced to share their network of where those cards can be used with other companies, right? So a little bit like telecom. Remember when you, at least, I don't know, here in Spain and Portugal, some years ago, you started to have sort of low cost kind of telecom or internet providers that basically are using the same networks, because the large ones, Vodafone and all this, had to share their networks. Anyway, just examples where competition is much stronger than even a few years ago. So when we're talking about business agility, I think it's important to clarify, okay, what do we need in order to, so we saw kind of what is the goal, at least from our perspective, when we want to say that we have business agility, but what do we need? What are some of the requirements to get there? So there are a few things. First, you need to optimize the operating model for a fast flow of value to customers and to the organization. The second requirement that I see is we need to organize around loosely coupled value streams. So in here, there's an idea that we need to have better understanding of our value streams. How do we provide value to customers so that we can then organize according to that? But also that those value streams, if we want to move fast, they should be fairly decoupled. Otherwise, we're going to get into a lot of handoffs of work, or we're going to get a lot of dependencies between different value streams, and we won't be able to help customers as quickly as we should. A third need for business agility, or a sort of requirement, would be for teams to focus more on user needs and user experience. This is something, it is changing, and you see more and more teams that have this mindset that, okay, what we're creating or what we're providing is not merely to say that we have a technical or a software-based solution. Is actually, is this usable? Is this something that goes in line with what the users expect, both in terms of functionality and the usability of that service or that application, right? And this is necessary as well for business agility, because otherwise we can be making changes quickly, but those changes are not in line with what the users need. And the last one, we need to be able to sense the environment and quickly course correct. Like I said, there's so much that's changing around us, both inside the organization typically, as well as outside the organization, right? So if we don't have, this is especially, say a mindset, is especially awareness that we're going to need to make changes. We can't expect that the way we've been organized and the way we've been working until now is going to help us indefinitely, right? We should expect that we need to change and we need to correct some things, hopefully, as quickly as we identify that there's some sort of gap or something that we need to address, right? So these four needs, I think, are important to keep in mind. And now in the rest of the presentation, I'll explain a bit how team topologies, or in the next section, how does team topologies help meet these four needs, right? So team topologies, as you might know, if you've read the book or you've heard a little bit about team topologies, is focus on fast flow, rapid feedback loops. How can we get fastest feedback on whether our services, our offerings, our products are actually helping the customers and doing what they're supposed to do? Improving interactions between teams, thinking about how we evolve the organization in a much more dynamic way than these large reorgs that we've seen in the past, and thinking about team cognitive load and other aspects of the dynamics of an organization and how we evolve it so that we can obviously improve our performance as well, but also get teams to a better state, get people more engaged, get people to understand better what is their purpose within the organization and the customers of the organization. And there are two main principles of team topologies that we always had in mind when we wrote the book. One is we're looking for a rapid flow of change, right? And when I say rapid flow of change, I mean of valuable changes that meet customer needs or meet the organization needs, right? And goals. I'm not talking about just quickly delivering features. That wouldn't be the point if we're trying to get value to customers, because value is obviously not just features, also reliability, usability, making the life of the user or our customers easier. So that's one principle. And the other that goes along is how can we get rapid feedback from our systems, our services, and obviously from the customers as well when we can. But the systems and services we have running already have or can have a lot of data that helps us understand, are we going the right direction? Did this change we make, did it actually reach the goals that we had? Are the customers using it? Are they able to do their work more efficiently or not, right? So how can we get this feedback as quickly as possible into the right people, which from our perspective are the teams themselves that should be the owners of those systems or services, right? So the less sort of hoops we have to get that feedback into the team, that would be ideal. And obviously this rapid feedback feeds into rapid flow of change because we can quickly identify where did we get it right, where did we get it wrong, what should we try to change next. And so I mentioned already some of the challenges that to fast flow and therefore to business agility as well are all the handovers that we might have in the life cycle of making these changes to our software and more broadly to our services. And so this might seem a bit sort of old school, hopefully. In some organizations, we still see this kind of separation in dev, test, transition, or delivery, maintenance, etc., business as usual. But there might be other types of handovers between teams around any kind of aspects of the life cycle, infrastructure, security, compliance. Sometimes customers themselves have to approve certain changes, and that might be where we have a larger bottleneck in the delivery life cycle. Whatever kind of handovers we have, and the more of them we have in the life cycle, even looking at a small change, how long it takes to get a small change to the hands of customers, that's going to slow us down. That's one, if not the main reason why we can't get to faster flow of change. And so in the book, we propose stream-aligned teams as kind of the unit of delivery, but also the unit that can get to the fast flow of change, right? And this means basically we're aiming to have teams that own some stream of work. This might be, now depends a bit on your architecture, on the size of what you offer to customers. This might be a whole service, it might be part of a product that is fairly independent from the rest of the product. It might be some other stream of work that has value to customers. But then for this stream that we identify, we have a team that has end-to-end ownership, meaning the team controls the full life cycle for this stream and are able to make changes and get feedback as quickly as possible. There's no shorter feedback loop than if the work never leaves the team, including the live operations and the kind of monitoring and all those aspects of a certain service or part of a product. What happens is that for a fast flow of change, ideally, or I should say ideally, if we only were able to identify the streams that are fairly independent, and we're able to have one team for each stream, that would be great. But that's typically not feasible, because what happens is that we need other teams that are more effectively supporting the stream-aligned teams and supporting the organization, because we have issues around how much a stream-aligned team can know, how much they can do if they don't have help, right? And without spending a lot of time explaining all the team types, we have resources on our website as well that you can look at. But very briefly, just to make sure we're all on the same page, an enabling team typically is a team of experts that's helping the stream-aligned teams bridge some capability gap, some skills gap, so in some domain of knowledge. So they do that by effectively being on the ground with the stream-aligned team, teaching them, mentoring, maybe pairing on some aspects of their work to show them, what are better ways to do this, what are the things you should be aware of. I'll go to the last team here. Last type of team is platform, where typically, even though the ownership of the life cycle for the stream should be in the stream-aligned team, they're going to need some help in terms of the number of aspects of life cycle they need to take care of. So we need to do, hopefully you have some of the ideation about what do we need to do to help customers inside the stream-aligned team as well. But then even if you just look at the kind of the more technical aspects, we need to set up databases, perhaps we need to do deployments, we need to do testing, we need to do monitoring, we need to have ways to observe our systems in production. All these things are typically benefiting from platform services. That means ways in which we can do this without having to know all the details, without having to be responsible for all the tooling that would be necessary, for all the setup and everything that is going to be required, right? So the platform abstracts a lot of those things, so the stream-aligned team can go faster, keep the ownership, because they are the ones who need to do the monitoring, they are the ones who need to do the deployments, but they have useful services to support them and abstract a lot of the complexity around those activities. So that's the idea for the platform, where you might end up with multiple platforms. Actually, we tend to think about what I just said, which is more kind of infrastructure layer and kind of lifecycle support layer, but then you might have platforms around data services that are useful for other teams to consume and things like that. Complicated subsystem team is sort of a, if you like, a last resort. We suggest that we try to avoid them, but there are some specific areas where we might have a very complicated algorithm that we need to run. We might have some very old technology. And when I say old, I mean very old, not something from the last 10, 15 years, but things that maybe have 40, 50 years for some reason that we still need to have them running. In those cases, we might need a complicated subsystem team so they can, again, abstract the complexity of that algorithm or the complexity of that technology, so it doesn't sort of bleed into the stream-aligned teams, because that would be too much for them to handle, typically, while still keeping a user-focused approach. So these are the 4 types of teams that we talk about. And then we also talk about 3 interaction modes. So basically, we have the teams, but that's not enough. Even if we have if the alignment to the 4 types of teams helps clarify and understand what is the purpose of our team in relation to the rest of the organization, we still need to have clarity on when are we going to interact with other teams? Why should we interact with other teams, and in which ways? So that's where the interaction modes are helpful. A lot of organizations and teams have said that just gives them the language and the way of discussing when they should interact with others, right? So collaboration means typically 2 teams working on a common problem, or you're trying to define some interface for a service that one team will provide to the other, for example. And this should happen for a specific time period, right? It's collaboration, not in the sense, oh, yes, we often collaborate with this other team, because that sounds more like a dependency than a collaboration. It's, okay, we're collaborating for this period of time to solve this specific problem. So we're going to know when the collaboration is over. That's the type of interaction we're talking about. And then you have facilitating on the right means one team typically that might have more experience, more expertise in some domain is helping another team learn about that domain. So obviously this is the common interaction or the typical interaction mode for enabling teams, but it could also happen between two streamlined teams where one team maybe has more experience, more senior people, or maybe they've been through some changes. Imagine, migrating to some new architecture, to microservices or something like that. They have the experience, they've been through it, and they are in a good position to facilitate other teams that are going to start on that journey. Again, it should be time framed. It should have a specific purpose, because we cannot expect the facilitation to go on indefinitely. We should have a specific goal. What are we trying to help the other team learn, and how long is that going to take? So with these components, sort of these building blocks, as I was saying earlier, that helps us also have visibility on at least part of the organization. What kind of teams do we have? What are they trying to achieve? What is their role? And what are the interactions that are happening at a given moment in time, at a given snapshot in time, right? So it helps us. These diagrams are really to help us have the right conversations about what are the challenges we have today, what do we need to do next. So I wanted to present the first case study to show a little bit, kind of in practice, these things I've been talking about, and how business agility can manifest in an organization. So this company, I have a hard time to pronounce. They're based in Norway. It's an insurance company. They're quite large in Scandinavia. And so they used to have a very project-based approach to how they deliver changes and how they provided things to customers. And they decided to switch to a value stream approach, right, that I was talking earlier. And so in their case, they did the kind of the work to understand, okay, what exactly are our value streams? Whereas before, everything was sort of tangled together, also at an architectural level. They really thought about, okay, what kind of customers do we have? What do we provide to them? And what are the things that we need to have in place? And they ended up with these 4 main value streams, which if you look at it, I'm not an expert in insurance for sure, but maybe some of you might work at some insurance company. But basically they identified, digital sales, pricing, digital customer service, and claims handling are fairly loosely coupled. Doesn't mean that they don't have any connection or dependencies, but they identify these are fairly decoupled, and therefore that not only they provide value to the customer, that they can present a claim, for example, or they can get customer service, but also we can expect that each of the value streams can work mostly independently from the others. In their case, they looked at also at what kind of supporting teams and topologies they needed, and they actually identified for each of the 3 supporting types of teams, they identified some needs they had. So, for example, enabling teams around architecture, information security. They had to keep a complicated subsystem for the mainframe, and then actually multiple platforms. So, and this one, so infrastructure platform is the one we typically hear about. And when you hear about things like platform engineering or internal developer platform, we're typically talking about infrastructure platform, maybe applicational level a bit as well. But there's really no sort of limitation to what kind of platforms we might have, as long as they're helping accelerate the streamline teams and not causing them more cognitive load. If they're helping reduce the load on streamline teams, then they can be anything. And so here you see a design platform is an interesting approach, where you might not have actually running services in that platform, but you have assets, you have guidance on how do we put these assets together, how do we do our branding, and who knows, anything that can fall within a design platform. And it's not really, or I wouldn't expect that they are going to have many or any kind of running services. It's just the idea of the platform exists to support streamline teams, to make it easy for them to pick up the assets or whatever they need to do their design aspects of their service or stream. All right, so in this section, one presents some more case studies and that cover some of the specific aspects I talked about, right? So basically, okay, this is all very nice about team topologies, hopefully, or you find it interesting enough to come to the meeting. And this is, some interesting ideas, but kind of how has this been put into practice, right? So how does team topologies help with business agility effectively? So I'll go through the 4 business agility needs that I mentioned earlier. So the first one was need to optimize the operating model for a fast flow of value. And team topologies effectively helps unblock teams and clarify interactions. Unblocking in the sense that teams have more clarity on their purpose and kind of what's expected from them. Hopefully also empowering teams to be able to say no to the work that is not aligned with their purpose, right? That should be something if we're talking about more autonomous teams and more empowered teams, well, part of that is to be able to say no, because, if justified, if we, have too many stakeholders, we have too much demand, and actually we can see that part of this demand is not in line with our purpose, because we are, let's say, platform team, which is, very common that they get a lot of requests for things that they could work on, but they need to focus on what exactly is going to help the most our teams, what exactly is the priority. And then we go into the idea of, well, we need good product thinking inside platforms as well. But that's topic of another talk. So basically, team topologies helps, again, have the tools to think about our operating model, to think about challenges and how can we overcome them. And so there's a very interesting example from a company called Food Asylum. They're quite big in the UK. So this is a chain of, it's a retail store for sportswear. I don't know if they're in other countries already, but they're quite big in the UK. And by the way, these case studies, they're all based on the articles we have on our website. If you go to teamtopologies.com, you will find the insurance company I talked about earlier, Food Asylum, and others that I'm going to talk about. And so anyway, they're quite large, both e-commerce and physical stores chain. And back in 2019, so this was some months before the book came out, what they were seeing was very high fragmentation of the work. They had concentrated like the product management aspects and teams in the UK, and then they had teams doing development across the world, Romania, India. And what they felt was that it was really hard to get any piece of work delivered, because the product managers were basically running around trying to understand for a given change or for some feature or something they wanted to deliver to customers. They had to go around and understand which team was responsible for what and coordinate what different changes that different teams need to do in order to provide this one piece of value to customers. So it was very fragmented, was very based on projects and coordinating projects, right? Even though they were talking about products there. And the work ended up being assigned mostly to individual developers. So even within these teams that were doing the development side, they were fragmented inside the team, where one person was working on the request from product manager A, and the other person was working on the request from another team, and things like this. So team topologies, they were actually one of the early adopters, and it helped them move towards this idea of teams with end-to-end ownership of some specific stream or service that has value to customers. And so that alone was very powerful. And they also started applying some other types of teams, including the platform, and also an enabling team around data, helping the Streamline teams improve their understanding of what data should we collect, how do we analyze this data, what are we trying to do with the data. And effectively, while you see here, this seems like let's say a final view. Actually, they went through multiple iterations to get to this point, right? It shouldn't have the expectation that we're going to go from this, in one step, and we'll suddenly have this, right? They went through multiple iterations, but just to show you like where they got to. Something they said that was very helpful was for the product managers, that they took special interest in the team interaction type, so the collaboration, facilitating, access service, because it helped them have useful, directed conversations about upcoming work. So where before they had to basically figure out and run around and as they go to try to get things done, now they had clarity of the teams, who is the owner of what, and also then a way to talk about when do certain teams need to collaborate, what are the things that we're going to need to collaborate on, what are the things that maybe one team is going to help to facilitate another, and so on. So that was around kind of how Team Topologies helps talk about and evolve the operating model, right? To get something that is much more, like in this example, much more aligned to the flow of change, the flow of value to customers. Because now the changes that typically are needed are much easier to map into one single Streamline team. Doesn't mean that they'll never need another team to be involved, but for most of the changes, it's much more straightforward to understand which team is going to be responsible. So the second need was around organizing around loosely coupled value streams. So we saw the example from the insurance company. So Team Topologies, like I said, encourages decoupling of business concepts. One example, or another example, is from a company called Pure Gym. Again, they're quite big in the UK. They're the largest operator of gyms, actual physical gyms. What's interesting is they're fully digital, meaning people go to the gym, but they don't sign up at the gym. They don't pay their membership at the gym. It's all online. They only go to the gym to exercise, and all the rest is through mobile app and web as well. Again, a bit similar to Food Asylum in terms of how they were running their work or delivering work back in 2019. A lot based on projects. They had temporary teams that people would switch around between teams based on what was the next project that they needed to do. And obviously the code and the architecture of their system was also suffering from that lack of ownership, lack of maintenance and improvements, and a single code repository for most of the services. So it was quite painful, basically, back then, or started to get more and more painful to get changes to the services and applications, and they were really struggling to keep up. When they look at Team Topologies, again, early adopter, organization, they thought about, okay, what are the streams that we actually have? And so they came up with this fairly decoupled streams between the actual gym and related services, acquisition, payments, retention, and other things. And they thought about what kind of enabling teams do we need? What kind of platform teams do we need? They actually had some questions about the mobile part. So, and that's fine. I like this example because it shows we're not going to have all the answers immediately. So there's a lot of this idea of continuous evolution of the organization versus large reorganizations that we need to learn as we make changes. And so I think this is a great example where they were okay in saying, we don't know, is mobile sort of a platform with some services that provide to others? Is this more of an enabling team where mobile experts are going to teach others? It was an open question. The third business agility need mentioned was around teams having to focus on user needs and user experience. This is no longer kind of nice to have. And now that you've seen the idea of a streamlined team, obviously we need those teams to have the skills, but especially or first of all, the focus on, we can't just build whatever and provide to customers and say, well, the functionality is there. That's no longer okay in the current world. That's no longer enough, basically. And so team topologies helps to some extent by we're helping teams focus and think about their core mission, which includes think about who are really your customers. We can have 20 stakeholders, people who have interest for some reason in what we do and have some expected outcome of what we do. But who are really the customers? Who are the people who are going to use what we provide, and that so we can focus on them, right? So team topologies helps with that. And one example from a company called USwitch. So this is what they do is allow users to compare home services like internet provider, electricity provider, etc., and be able to switch if they want for a better, more economic or better service provider, right? And so what's interesting, they actually had already for a long time, you see here already in 2015, this idea of teams should be stream aligned, even before the book existed. But basically that's what they were doing. They were aligning teams with a different kind of stream of value to customers, which in their case is, you might say, kind of more straightforward to understand. Like there was a team focused on how do we compare energy providers and allow our customers to switch? How do we compare broadband providers and so on? What's interesting, and this is very much aligned to what I was saying before, that they tried for a while to only have streamlined teams, basically. And what they realized was that after some time, these teams, yes, they had end-to-end ownership, but they were so overloaded with a lot of details in the sense of not a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the ways of how they did all the life cycle aspects, because each team had to own everything, the full stack, all the aspects of the life cycle. And so this became almost unbearable. These teams felt like we cannot make changes for the customers anymore. We cannot focus on that because we have all this other effort that we need to put in place just to keep the service running and reliable and all that stuff. So that when they realized that, they made some changes, again, over a period of time. This was not from one day to another. They introduced an infrastructure or cloud infrastructure platform. They introduced enabling teams around SRE because they felt that was something that some teams had a gap that they needed help with. At the time this snapshot was taken, they were, for example, introducing new service in the platform to help with canary deployments. So that gives you an example or illustration that this is a snapshot. This is what's happening at this point in time, right? But essentially, the focus course, the streamlines is still there, but they were able to reduce cognitive load for those teams, and therefore allowing them to again provide value and understand more of their customers to be able to evolve their services. A detail here that's interesting. Before, they probably had, I think they had only an energy streamline team, like to do comparison of energy services. As they grew, and this is something to keep in mind, as we grow, because we don't want to grow the teams forever, we want to keep the teams to a reasonable number, which tends to be between 5 and 9 people for trust reasons and effective communication reasons, at least. At some point, they probably had to, this energy services, they had to realize we cannot grow the team anymore, but there's more that we're now providing to customers. How do we deal with this? And then I suppose they split into, okay, we need the team that's focusing on the stream that is about returning users, and the other stream for the rest. I don't know all the details, but I thought that was an interesting thing also to pay attention here. All right, and then getting to the last need for business agility, or requirement for business agility, is this ability to sense the environment and quickly course correct. So team topology is very much a sense-making approach to gain situational awareness. I can say one of my, I wouldn't say most proud moments, but I'm fairly proud. If you're familiar with the work of Dave Snowden, he created the Kinefin framework, and he talks about the difference between when we're working in a complicated domain versus a complex domain versus a chaotic domain and a simple domain, which is something that we, to some extent, was part of our background when we were writing the book. And he found, or he's a promoter of team topologies, and anyway, he's super critical of a lot of things. So having his approval was quite interesting, because, and I think it's because team topology is not a prescriptive framework telling you need this specific team and specific roles and specific way of working. It's sort of a first principles approach, and also very much sense making. Like, we need to have ways to identify the problems, and when do we need to evolve and make changes. I think, or I've seen that many people kind of sort of miss this part, which is, if you look at the book, is mostly in part 3 of the book. And part 2 is where we talk about team types and interaction modes. So I think maybe a lot of people stop reading after part 2. And so they get into this idea that we can have an ideal operating model, which is very much not what we're saying. And so in terms of this sense-making approach and being aware of that we need to evolve, again, I come back to the Pure Gym example, where they actually had, for a period of time in 2020, they said, we are going to take the cost effectively for a period of time of having these new teams collaborate strongly between them, because this is a new operating model. We don't have a lot of clarity on, boundaries of responsibility between these different teams, especially the enabling and platform teams. What should be in the platform? What should be outside the platform? What kind of skill gaps are there in the teams that we need to help with enabling work? And I find this quite fascinating, actually, the first time I saw it, that they would, because it's not common to see organizations actually pay the price effectively for a period of time of high collaboration, meaning we probably are not going to be delivering a lot of stuff during this period. But we understand the value for the organization to have clarity around boundaries, have clarity around responsibilities and the purpose of the different teams. Eventually, they got to, obviously, they evolved. they move from that period of high collaboration to where, okay, we have some clarity now where, okay, what kind of work and help we need from the enabling teams, what should be in the platform, which interestingly is not really an infrastructure platform, is a platform that provides services around membership management, and how these
Manuel,
teams need to interact. Yep.
We have some questions in the chat, so it would be great if we could answer at least some of them.
Okay, if you don't mind, I prefer to finish first and then we get to the questions.
Okay.
All right. And eventually they moved on, and they're, again, is another snapshot. Even at this point, the mobile team is still working in a kind of not fully clear way. They're helping some teams, they're collaborating with some teams, but it was still at this point, late 2020, was not totally clear if this was going to become more of a platform team or enabling team. Effectively, the team types help us. They work as sort of magnets, right? It's not saying we're going to call all the teams with this specific type, but it's basically, okay, should we be more of a streamline team? Should we be more of an enabling team? What needs to happen for us to really become that type of team, and why should we become that type of team, right? Again, understanding of who are our customers, whether they're internal or external, what exactly, how are we helping them and the organization. Okay, I'll try to be quick with the last part. It's just some pointers really to other things, other approaches that are relevant, we believe, within business agility. What else matters? Because, well, with team topologies, obviously we had specific focus, but there's a lot more that we need to think about. Obviously, strong technical foundations. If you think about books like DevOps Handbook, Cloud Native Transformation Accelerate, are just some examples where we're thinking about kind of how do we improve the technical foundation and the practices and the culture around our technical ability. Obviously, all the continuous stuff, if you like, everything should be continuous these days, right? We're moving away from the staged approach of big changes into kind of much more continuous delivery, continuous integration, but also testing and all these things. Another aspect important to consider is domain-driven design. It actually works quite well with the value stream approach. And effectively, domain-driven design has some powerful techniques to untangle business concepts, right? And that's effectively what was happening with Pure Gym and Foot Asylum. And I see that in many organizations where we get to a sort of monolith that is blocking us from going faster, but it's not just a technical monolith. It's often because we've grown over time, we've tangled up a lot of different business concepts and things that we're offering to customers. They're all together, and we need to identify how do we split them, what are the things that are key to our business, what are the things that are more support aspect, etc. Wordley maps from a strategy perspective is quite important as well. Effectively, Wordley maps, if you haven't heard about it, helps increase our situational awareness and apply the right techniques, thinking about what do we offer? Is this something that should be custom built, or should be productized, or we should look at it as an utility, and then how we look at that over time. And what's interesting with Wordley maps is you can overlay that kind of thinking about more the components and services we have. You can then overlay with, for example, thinking about teams. What types of teams do we need when we're a more custom stage of the offering versus a product stage where we expect to have more platform services, perhaps, and so on. And I think the last one I want to mention is dynamic reteaming. So there's a book called Dynamic Reteaming. Because if we're looking at evolving the organization, we need to keep in mind that how do we actually make those changes to the teams without, disengaging people, without making them feel like, I'm now working in a different team or in a different setup that I'm not happy with. So effectively, dynamic reteaming provides some patterns that help reshape organizations using these proven patterns and socially minded approach to team changes. That's what I quite like about that book. And finally, there are already people. So Suzanne Kaiser is one of our valued practitioners, but she has a whole lot of experience, and she's working on a book, effectively, how to bring these things together, which I think is really where we're going next. It's not just team topology, it's not just wordly mapping, is how do we bring these things together? What are the connection points? So her book should come out, I think, this year. Looking forward to that. And the last slides are just references. They're free resources, here on our website, teamtopologies.com. Also, some of the tools that we use that we mentioned in the remote workbook, they're available on GitHub, but you can also find them through the website. Infographics, they're quite helpful if you want to help other people get a high-level view of why team topologies and how to get started, right? What is team topologies? And finally, we have an online academy with video-based training where we try to, in a short time frame, help people get, the concepts of team topologies. And now we're growing into kind of other areas like platform as a product, independent value streams with domain-driven design, and there will be more coming in the near future. All right, thank you. Sorry if it was a bit longer than expected, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, great. Then thank you, Manuel. I guess we can have a PDF of the slides to share.
Sure, I'll send it afterwards.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, then let's go with the question in case someone has to leave early and we are not able to answer all those questions. I will put them in the meetup and provide the answers from Manuel also there. So even if it's lost now, I'll put them in writing. Okay. So right, what happened to my chat window now?
I can see it. Maybe I can start reading question from Ioana.
Yeah, that's the first one.
Organizing teams into categories is one important thing to increase flow within the teams. Categories or streams of work. I'm curious to understand how the different development methodologies have an impact on productivity, usage of Kanban, Scrum, Safe, others. What are your thoughts here? Which ones are more favorable? Well, we could spend another hour or more, multiple hours with this question. So in team topologies, we don't really prescribe and, like I said, very specific roles or ways of working, because if we take the team as the unit, they should be the ones deciding what are the working practices and that help them as a team, right? If we really believe in this team first approach and the team as the unit, then it should be up to the team to make those decisions in terms of how they work, whether it's Kanban or Scrum. I do have to say that I find that a lot of teams use Scrum without understanding where Scrum is coming from and why it was introduced more than 20 years ago. So I think that's something that teams should reflect on, but at the end of the day, they should make those decisions. Safe is another story where it's a much more large prescriptive framework, and would be the topic for another talk. I don't see the principles of fast flow applied in Safe, if I might say it like that. But I'm not also saying that is never helpful to apply Safe, but from a fast flow perspective, I don't see the principles reflected there.
So interestingly, Safe is actually hinting to team topology. So they at least recognize you're there and actually do recommend to take a look on team topologies.
I know, and we were not consulted on how they brought team topology into SAFe, and the problem is that they only used part, which is the team types, but then they forgot all the rest, and that's why I think that the principles we're trying, why these types of teams, why these interaction modes are not really absorbed in SAFe, but yes, it brought some attention to team topologies for sure.
Okay. Then the next one, how to decide when it's time to create a new stream-aligned team. And second, what should we do to make sure that feature teams and product teams work well together?
So the first question, that should be mostly a business decision, right? So in the examples you saw, some of those changes in the organization were quite important, and obviously there are periods where there are more changes to the teams, and we need to be mindful of how we do that. But let's say even if you have a kind of stable, like we're not in a period of a lot of changes, we have sort of stable teams. The idea is to keep the team stable, because the other part of that question, I think, could be, how do we know if a streamlined team is working on the wrong thing, right? Is this something valuable, or is this still valuable, what they're working on? And even in that case, we might say, well, okay, maybe the team should be working now, focused on something else, but we can keep the team together. And there is no reason to kind of break up the team if they're performing well. It's just that whatever, the markets change or our priorities changed, so they should be working on something else. And then I think whenever we identify there's a new stream, there's a new, sometimes we also identify that there's a team, one of the common patterns, a team is growing because we have more and more responsibilities, and at some point we should realize, this is not sustainable. And teams typically see that the amount of coordination, the amount of time they spend where they're not really involved with what's being discussed, because it's someone else's responsibility, just keeps increasing. So one typical way is to say, okay, maybe we need 2 smaller teams that have a more clear focus and responsibility. And sometimes we might identify, well, we should have focus on some new, maybe it's a new product, maybe it's some new set of features that we think we should have a new team responsible, because it's something fairly new. It's not really a responsibility of the existing teams. So those might be some reasons, but whenever from a business perspective, it makes sense to start a streamlined team, a business and flow and cognitive load perspective. In terms of feature teams and product teams, so we don't, the 4 types of teams are not, we don't really think that we should have feature teams usually. In fact, what SAFe did was change from, they used to talk about feature teams, component teams, and now they're talking about the types of teams in team topologies. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail because there are more questions, but we think in general, I would try to avoid feature teams, and the product team is just, it's a very broad, or there isn't a very clear definition, because is this a team responsible for one product? Because if you have a large product, then you cannot have just one team. And that's why we talk about streamlined teams, because it gives the sense that when we have a large product or we have a large system, we're going to need to identify the streams that we can align the teams to.
In my experience, that product and feature team is something, sometimes also terminology between internal teams and external teams. So the internal product management team giving requirements to some external feature team. And so working across organizational boundaries in a flow and value stream system. Okay, then Sebastian, magst du deine Frage selber stellen?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't help but think of the hire model, because what I see is large organizations having problems modularizing their stuff, and they end up building huge monoliths and legacy systems. So did you see team topologies help companies in that direction? Does this go somehow together, the hire model and team topologies?
Do you mean in the sense that you wrote in the chat about small micro enterprises and things like that?
Yeah, I'm a former coder, so I love refactoring. I love like modular systems, and
Yeah.
I got the feeling that hire and team topologies both do the same.
So yeah, there are a couple of things there. I think first, team topologies is sort of a fractal approach in the sense of, even if we go at the level of the platform, right? The platform effectively inside you have sort of streamlined teams, because you might have platform services and you want to align streamlined teams to those. The difference that they're working for internal customers, not external. So even at that level, and then you can go to the macro level, I think what you're talking about, where yes, we could look at, okay, if we have and going back to the value streams, if we identify different value streams, this could be actually different companies in theory, each working on a different value stream, and then you have a group of teams within that value stream. There's some interesting examples more on the manufacturing world, but if you know the company that produces the Gore-Tex material, they're quite known that every time they would reach sort of department that was over 150 people, they would split them, and they would have to force themselves to think, what are the different kind of let's say business lines that are within this group, and then we split. So that's similar to the example I was talking about the energy service with U-Switch. So I think, yes, sort of you kind of see this like almost like the Russian doll, right? Inside there's again another doll, and so on. You can look at it both when you're sort of going down into platform as going up into, okay, maybe the organization can have different value streams, and within a group of teams aligned to this value stream, another group of teams aligned to that value stream, and so on. In fact, you mentioned the higher model and some people are looking into that, and how team topologies can help with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Then there was the next question, team topologies in SAFe, and I think you actually answered that already, kind of. And then the next one would be from Jens. If we are talking about business agility as a baseline for this model, and business agility obviously focuses on the enterprise as a whole, how do we integrate non-product or IT-related teams into this model?
Well, I would look again at the value streams, and that's, I think, what smart organizations already realize, that we need to understand what are value streams, because even the product focus can be constraining us in some ways that maybe it shouldn't be, in the sense of we're focusing on products and we're not really focusing on what is the value we're offering, and do we need a product or do we need something else, or and people get very attached to the products and not to what is the value we're providing. So I think from an organizational point of view, the ideal, well, I shouldn't say ideal, but I think a better approach is to think about value streams, and then within the value streams, you're not really thinking about, is this IT or is this product? This is what we're focusing on, and then what you end up having is sort of a hierarchy of value streams. I was talking, for example, recently with a large pharmaceutical organization, and for them, actually, they have 2 or 3 main value streams at the high level of the organization, which was drug research, something like that, and diagnosis and something else, right? The whole organization, and this is thousands and thousands of people, they are all in one of those value streams, but then of course there are multiple layers. And so I think that's a good way to think about it. It doesn't mean that we won't have some cross-cutting IT and especially platforms that can help multiple value streams. And some people look at the platforms themselves as a value stream, a support value stream. But that's how that's my suggestion, right? But obviously, for many organizations, this is very far away from how they organize today with IT, and then or the engineering, and then they have product next to it, and then they have marketing and so on. So I think we need all of those kind of capabilities, but the way we organize should be aligned to value streams. That's how I think of it.
Okay, thanks. So maybe, so there's one part of the question, how is the interaction of teams with leadership? So is there something in team topologies that touches that aspect?
So I'm looking at the relationship between teams and leadership. I'm not sure I understand the question exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe I can comment on this.
Sure. Yeah, that's probably easier.
But it's not just steering in which direction we want to go, like from the content point of view, yeah, value streams, etc., but also more interesting, the disciplinary leadership. Because if I'm thinking of topologies, I also want to make sure that I have this network of people that are caring for the people and make sure that I have those interactions to make sure teams are staffed well and all this kind of aspects.
Yeah, so we're more and more seeing, I think that's a really good remark, and we're more and more seeing the need for having, I guess you could call them enabling teams, but that are focused on, if you like, fast flow, or they focus on business agility, but in that sense that you're saying, like, who is looking at kind of the groups of teams, right? Because each team might be doing well, they might be focused on, okay, who, managing our dependencies, which other teams do we need to interact with, but they might not have a kind of broader view. So we think more and more that's really important to think about growing a team of people who are sort of fast flow enablers, if you like. They're looking at what are the common gaps that need to be addressed. What are the teams, like you said, maybe they're understaffed. What are the teams that are maybe need help too because they're getting too large, they have too many responsibilities. So definitely I think there's a place for that. And what you start to see already for some time, some organizations have what they call a ways of working group or a team. I've seen that more in larger organizations because there's also an aspect of management wanting to see or understand what's the return of creating this sort of team or group. So large organizations tend to be more open to that. And so I think those types of groups might be a good place to start. And people like John Smart, who wrote the book Sooner, Safer, Happier, he also talks about that. Like, we need some teams and maybe a group of teams that are looking into these aspects to helping identify gaps, helping identify the sense-making approach, right? Making sense of where we are and how to evolve. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm allowed, but adding to this, wouldn't you consider like a human resources team or like a people leadership team also as some kind of platform, but not from a technical point of view, but more from the humans in the other squads point of view?
Definitely. And actually I wanted to mention that about Sebastian's question as well. That's also what we're starting to see. I mean, after writing the book, we had the thought that this is actually, there's a lot that's applicable outside of technology-based products, right? But because that's our background, we didn't want to make the claim that this is broadly applicable. But now we're starting to see HR, not so much yet, but we're starting to see marketing teams, even legal teams, looking at it from that perspective. Okay, what type of team should we be? Because that kind of changes the work that we should be doing. If we think about, if legal, for example, or HR, if they think of themselves, we're more of a platform team, for example, then what kind of services should we provide to our teams to allow them to do things more easily? And maybe we help teams do their own recruiting with some guardrails, or we help them do some other kind of people management things in a more effective way. So there's a lot of potential there, I think, and we start to see some examples, but it's still sort of early days.
Okay. There was a question from, I think, Aria. Has there been other books before Team Topologies talking about archetypes of teams or structural patterns of organization?
Not in the same way as Team Topologies, that is dedicated to that, or it has a strong focus on that. Like I said before, there have been a lot of different terminologies, and we were just talking about feature teams, product teams, but to my knowledge, there's not something that is really a literature that's really focused on this topic as much as Team Topologies. And effectively, what many people tell us is, now I have a shared language to talk about the organization and the interactions between teams and all that. So I think that's the gap exactly that Team Topologies filled. Not to say that there aren't other books that had great ideas, obviously. I think I see mention of Unicorn Project and Phoenix Books, but they were not, they were looking at it from, yes, the perspective of flow, the perspective of how do we should improve the way teams work together, but not in the same, not with the same lens as Team Topologies, I would say.
Okay, then, thank you. I think we are quite over time, so I would close the session here. So one last minute, if you have some really burning last question, pop it out right now.
Yeah, I would say also, if you have other questions, we try to be responsive on social media, especially LinkedIn, either me or Matthew, or there's also a Team Topologies account that you can follow, and that's if you want to keep up with news and also ask questions, that's probably the best place.
Okay. Then thank you, Manuel, for being here.
Thank you for having me, and great questions.
Thank you for the questions, for the interactions. So I will stop the recording now.